Great. Welcome everybody. Welcome everybody to Finance Technology Options. Oh, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Welcome everybody to GALAConnected, Bounce Forward. Welcome to Finance Technology Options for Global Payments. Very excited to have everybody here. And my name is Dieter Runge. My day job is at a software company called BoostLingo, managing business strategy over there. Joining me for this panel, our host for today's session of FinTech for Language Services is Patricia Jaworski. Patricia is the Managing Director for All About Languages, an Australia-based language service company based in Launceston, Tasmania. Patricia is also Secretary and Events Coordinator for AALC, which of course is the Australasian Association of Language Companies. Patricia's panelists today, joining us also from Australia, Dominic Carter, Director of Finance and Systems at Polaron. Dominic is the Financials and Systems Operation Helm at Polaron, which has offices here in Australia, where I am, in the US, the UK, and the EU. Dominic has a master's degree in French and Theory of Language and Literature from the University College of London, and has worked at several leading European translation companies, managing ranges of projects and portfolios at some very well-established corporate entities throughout Europe. Prior to that, he spent some years in publications office in the EU and Luxembourg, proofreading a range of official publications, and has worked as a translator for the Ministry of Education, where he was the head of the language school. Outside of work, Dominic is a musician and an avid reader of thrillers, philosophies, and classic French literature. Joining us from Wise, formerly known as TransferWise, Daniel McCarthy, who is business development for the Asia Pacific region. Dan is Sydney-based and responsible for Wise's business development expansion throughout the Asia Pacific, where he delivers direct-to-consumer cross-border payment solutions and partners with banks and other institutions to make international financial management simpler, faster, and cheaper, and more transparent. Wise is a publicly listed company moving over $6 billion of money internationally every month with over 10 million customers worldwide. Dan is very passionate about the Australian and New Zealand small business sectors and has worked closely with SMEs for several years in lending, risk regulation, and strategic management. Dan has been a founding member for a number of startups in both apps and technology. And a little bit of trivia detail here, a former member of the Australian rowing team competing at several world championships. So we have a pro rower on the panel today. Mike Donlan, not a pro rower, but a very good hockey player, I must say. VP of External Opportunities at pros.com. What can you say about pros.com? Very big name in our industry in the language services sector. And Mike has been VP of External Opportunities over there since 2017, but has worked in a number of different capacities with pros.com. He oversees also the Pros Pay service that was initiated in 2018. Mike is based in upstate New York. And also joining us today, Nathan Archie, Country Manager, Australia and New Zealand for Payoneer. Nathan is the like I said, as country manager for Australia and New Zealand. Very passionate about e-commerce and a role in supporting sellers to grow globally, expand in new markets successfully. He has worked with major global brands, including eBay, Sony, Consumer Electronics, Village Roadshow, PepsiCo, and brings significant insight and experience into the retail, e-commerce, and cross-border trade sector. So Nathan holds a Master of Commerce and serves as a non-executive director for several not-for-profits and acts as a board advisor to a number of startups. So, and hopefully I've got everybody covered there. Welcome everyone to the panel today. Just a couple of housekeeping items for the folks joining us at the session today. Please keep in mind, if you have questions for our speakers, just use the button in the control panel, mark Q&A. We will try to get to as many questions as we can and have time for at the end of the presentation. You certainly are welcome to chat with other attendees using the chat button in your control panel. Please note that you can direct chat to panelists, but just, you probably won't get a response until after the event. If you experience any technical difficulties, please use your chat box to ask for help, and Gala staff will certainly be there to help you troubleshoot, and that will help you out if you have any issues. So without further ado, I'd like to pass the mic over to Patricia and get things started. And very exciting topic, so I'm really keen to get into it. So welcome everyone.
Thank you, Dieter. Thanks for joining us. And most of us here are from the land down under in Australia, except for Mike, and it's 1 a.m. So we're excited. I hope so anyway, but it's an exciting topic and it's an emerging topic of interest actually, and I hope that our audience does have questions for the panel. This is a $23 billion industry, the language services industry, and we are working with linguists, translators, interpreters across the world. And the question that comes up, or sometimes it's an afterthought, that how do we manage payments, large or small? And who absorbs those costs? When do we have that discussion? How do we minimize costs? And how do we track these transactions and reconcile them later on? There are new options available for payments for services that are across international borders, where traditionally we've used bank transfers or PayPal. What are the other services that are provided now that are simpler, faster, and more cost-effective options for cross-border payments between our freelancers and LSPs? So to start with, I might ask for the first poll question to come up. And if you could answer what you're currently using, you'll see it in the poll section. Which method do you use for payments across currencies or borders? I'd like to know what the audience is using, and this will give us some insight for our panelists as well. In the meantime, I might hand it over and ask a question to Dominic and Mike. Perhaps Dominic, I'll start with you. Can you tell us your experience with making payments overseas, being a language service, working for a language service provider? What has been your experience?
Okay, hi, thanks. So I guess in Australia, we have already the notion that we're very insular. So a lot of our work happens in Australia with NATI accredited translators, and that forms a major proportion of what we do. At the same time, at Polaron, we do have an office in the States and an office in Poland and so on. So we do contract vendors overseas. So if it concerns a country where we already have a presence, we've got a bank account there, and we can generally deal with that. So European payments aren't a great issue for us, for example. Most of our payments in Australia are for Australians, and they happen by bank transfer, and that's fine. And then you have these handful of micro payments to the vendors that are delivering languages that we can't do here or that correspond to a specific demand. And this is where we enter a world of pain, really, which requires loads of coordination and sometimes creativity. So whenever we have an overseas transaction, an overseas vendor, we firstly try to agree on what the payment terms are before we even start the job. I guess that's the best way. And we tend to be asked to have PayPal, or bizarrely enough, Western Union seems to be quite popular. So a lot of our payments happen that way. I don't quite understand why people like PayPal, because in essence, nobody gets what they're expecting to receive, as far as I understand, and nobody pays what they expect to pay either. But on the other hand, I think the access to it is very easy. So especially to receive money, I guess. I can tell you a billion anecdotes of how my life has gone wrong in trying to pay for vendors. The $20 payment that ends up costing me 4 hours of admin. It's not rare. It's not super popular. It doesn't happen all the time, but it does happen. And I don't know how we work our way around that. And I'm looking really forward to hearing some of these solutions that are around, and what the uptake is, especially for me, because people still use PayPal a lot because it's just so common. And people just have it. You just, I just think you need an email address to receive money through PayPal. So I'd be really interested to see what's around, and if we can get rid of that particular bugbear.
Thanks, Dominic. That's interesting. It is a world of pain, and as we can see from the poll, that 50% of users are using a bank transfer for cross-border payments. Mike, you're representing pros.com. What are you hearing from your linguists, and what are the bugbears for overseas payments?
Yeah, thanks. So from our standpoint, I mean, we've been around, I guess, as a company and as a platform for 22 years. And it's always been about the meeting of a freelancer and a client, or a language company working to find their language provider. And over the past 3 years, we've seen that there is a need to help out, as I think Dominic called it, these points of pain, or the world of pain, and taking away those 4 hours of admin. So what we've done is tried to combine all the different options that are out there. So it will be an interesting panel for me to hear as well, because we work with Payoneer, we work with Wise. I mean, both great systems. We work with PayPal. We handle bank transfers. We use World Remit. We use MoneyGram, Western Union another way. So what we're finding out is that there are many, many ways to move money, and that in order to keep your freelancers happy, you want to meet them in a way that makes sense for them, where they can get it quickly, and where it really meets their needs. Their needs may be different from today to the end of the year, because maybe at the end of the year, PayPal is more important to them than a bank transfer, because they know they'll get it before they have to buy gifts for Christmas or something. So those things, we hear about those things all the time. I think in terms of, the question of experience making payments, things like that, I think what language companies need to know is that the technology is improving every day. That Payoneer and Wise, both on here, are competing with each other to make this better and better and better, and it's happening. And that's really exciting for both the language company and the freelancer, because there are options out there to get more of your money faster, and to keep more of it. I think from a language company standpoint, people want it to happen within their workflow, so that those 4 hours that Dominic talked about, we've seen that lots, don't happen, or they're minimized. So, from our service, what we've built is something where we're trying to take away those 4 hours. You can just give it to us at ProsPay, and we'll take care of it as best we can. because someone might want RIA money in the Ukraine that you've never even thought about using, and someone else has used those things. So I hope that helps answer the question. But really, it's a matter of that the freelancer expects convenience on their end, even though a language company has no idea what they want, because it's not your specialty.
Yeah.
So, but it keeps getting faster. It keeps getting better. I think, what are we seeing? It's getting better, and there are people out there competing to save you money too. So that $40 wire transfer may not need to happen. So it can be more cost neutral to you than it has been in the past.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a highly emotional part of the process. You don't want to burn any bridges or create tension with getting payments across on time. We might go to the next poll question as bring that up, but also over to Nathan and Dan. What, in regards to fees, how does fintech such as Payoneer and Wise overcome some of these headaches that Dominic and Mike have just mentioned to vendors across borders? Nathan, I might ask you the first question.
Yeah, sure. Look, essentially, businesses like ours, and I won't speak for Dan, but Wise and Payoneer both have been around for some time, is the reality, and we've sort of developed different APIs and capabilities and infrastructure to be able to send money globally, but send it as a local. So essentially, we've invested in the infrastructure with banking partners all over the world, so that rather than sending a wire where the funds will go from your bank through intermediary banks and then eventually arrive at the translator's bank account, where potentially fees have been taken out, it's the ability to send funds from USD to AUD, for example, and it's sent out locally from a local Australian bank to that translator. And that's essentially what it is. And it reduces the time and it reduces the cost. And then, we've also mentioned before about the flexibility for, Mike mentioned it earlier. I believe it was Mike who mentioned the ability for the translators to receive the funds as they want to. So flexible methods of payment, and that's the other option as well. That's the critical piece. How do you enable and that's the technology that we've built, the ability for the translator to receive the funds as they want to, whether it be in their bank account or in a wallet in a foreign currency. And then that gives them the flexibility to either convert it to their local currency. We've created card products that they can access those funds in that same currency if they want to, or they can, they might have other needs globally as well. So they might have to convert from USD to South African Rand, for example, and it gives them the ability to use the funds as they need to.
Yep. Oh, great. So you've got a suite of options there. How about you, Dan? How does Wise overcome some of these headaches that we experience in the industry?
Yeah, look, I think it's really well captured by what we stand for at Wise. So Wise's mission is quite literally money without borders. We stand for everything that's instant, convenient, transparent, and low cost when it comes to cross-border payments. So we really like to measure our progress against those four things. When it comes to the actual speed of the payments, we're currently pushing about 40% of our payments instantly globally. So that really ties back to ease of use for the actual user themselves. Having that visibility of a payment going from point A to point B solves so many of the headaches associated with making a cross-border payment. From a convenience perspective, we can really break this down into two things. The first is making it accessible. And to do that, we're currently catering for over 80 countries and almost 60 currencies, including the options to actually make payments to a card and payments to digital wallets instead of bank accounts. So all of a sudden that opens up new regions of the world where sometimes people are actually not banked or bank customers, as well as parts of the world where people just have a higher propensity to transact through digital accounts. The second aspect of convenience that we're really trying to push to solve some of those headaches is ease of use. We can really see from the second poll question here that seems to be a big chunk of the voters actually going for something that they're quite familiar with. So for ease of use, we're now down to being able to create a Wise profile in just as little as 3 clicks and to actually make your first international payment in just 8 clicks. So for someone who's quite new to finance or technology, it's really, really user-friendly.
Okay, thanks very much, Dan. And so are there any compliance or security issues we need to consider? Because just sending money overseas, how do we track it? Who is it going to? You know, do we send it to a bank account, or do we send it to this email address and Western Union in some country that we're not very familiar with? Mike, can you answer that question around security or compliance issues that we need to consider for making payments?
Yeah, I think from our standpoint, we go through a few different compliance checks that may help. First of all, the first thing that we do is make sure that it is for language business that from which we send the money. Any of these services that you use, whether it's Western Union, they have security checks. Wise does a great job of it. I know any banks that we use, Payoneer, they are also running all sorts of security measures and kind of helping you out if you're trying to make those payments. That's what I think we find is the most important, is that any partner used to send the money has things built in and would not likely be in business still if there was all sorts of fraud happening and things like that. I think what's important is to understand your government when you're paying someone. So for us, being located in the U.S., when it comes to ProsPay or Pros.com, we have to be careful of whatever the U.S. government has decided. And so that might mean that we have a lot of trouble paying people in certain countries. So when you talk about compliance, that's what we think about first and foremost. I think when people are getting money, they need to think about what it means for tax implications. And typically it's okay, I think, to put that onto any of your freelancers, any of your vendors, because it's local to them that they're doing the work. So anyway, I think from our standpoint, we do push it onto whoever is sending the money to use a lot of the compliance. And compliance checks do come back. So if a bank is unsure about who they're paying, often it will get stopped, and that may slow the transaction. I think Naomi, who's in the chat, said, well, some things took weeks, or we do see that once in a while. If we're trying to send money to a potentially unbanked person in a refugee camp in Africa who's working and doing some great interpreting, we see those things happen, and trying to figure out who that person is for sure that's accepting the money, the banks do handle the compliance there. So it is important to understand and think about, and it does require sometimes some conversation with your talent. So
yeah, I think that's one of the concerns with LSPs or LSCs, to make sure those payments will come across and it's secure and they're going to get there on time. Dan, what security or compliance measures does Wise put in place? And do you take care of all that so the LSP doesn't have to handle any of that stuff, doesn't have to worry about it?
We absolutely do. So I think it's quite important from the actual Wise user's perspective to understand the complexities that are involved in sending money through a traditional SWIFT payment, for example. The payment would actually happen through a number of correspondent banks or intermediaries in the transaction, and with each involvement or stop along the way that payment actually makes, it adds a level of complexity. So each bank that's actually carrying the funds through and across the border will undertake separate checks. And with each stop, it does actually make it much harder to get visibility into the status of that payment, where it's currently at, and obviously it's much slower and much more expensive. So Wise really breaks this up into two different segments. The first is the user or the Wise user actually making the payment, so that's the sender. And the second is the recipient actually receiving that payment. So in the middle, Wise sits in between the two banks, if you will. So the bank that would receive the payment onshore from the person actually making the payment, and then the bank that we would actually make a payout to on their behalf in the receiving country. So those two separate legs really shorten that journey that a traditional payment would make. And they also limit the number of different stops, checks, etc., through all sorts of different banking partners that would traditionally be done. Now, that doesn't mean that we cut any corners when it comes to security and compliance. It's something that we have to be very, very robust and stringent on. And so we do those checks both on the outgoing side, so before we actually effect the payment from the originating country, and also on the receiving end as well with our local payout partner there.
Yeah, great. And Nathan, do you have anything to add about security or compliance to consider, or what do you take care of so
Yeah,
that
definitely.
we
I
don't
think
have to worry about that?
it definitely, Patricia. There's so much around, challenges around funds crossing internationally. We've seen specifically here in Australia, which most of the business might not be aware of. There's banks in Australia that receive billion-dollar fines for AML breaches, for money laundering breaches, just involved with sending funds overseas. And one of the banks had like 50 million breaches in a sort of a 2-year period. So it's definitely something that we take very seriously. We work with so many for marketplaces, for example. We work with the likes of Airbnb and Upwork and Fiverr, and we facilitate all of their payments globally. We also do formerly 1 hour translation, now blend. So we're very well versed in terms of the ability to pay out globally to many, many payees. And one of the challenges that these businesses turn to us for is that compliance issue. How do you know that the person that you're paying on the other end is a legitimate person? They're not, fraudulent acting, and that they're there. And that's we take on the KYC in that, so they know your customer. We do the check on the payee before they're actually being able to be paid, so that reduces the risk of that payment going to someone who it shouldn't be going to. The other thing that we offer is in-network payments. So if someone has a Payoneer account and you've got a Payoneer account, then there's a free payment as well, which is able to be made. So it's actually a free transfer. But aside from the price, we've done the due diligence and the KYC on that individual who's being onboarded. So there's that sort of element of trust and safety that the person you're paying is who they say they are. So that's one of the things that is very, very dear to our heart, and we've invested so much into. It's actually 33% of our revenue goes to compliance, and 33% of our staff worldwide is compliance and risk, making sure that payments are going to the right people and arriving there on time.
Yeah, okay. And Dominic, have you had any issues in the past with security or compliance or paying to the right person?
Yes, of course. I've had them all, I think. I've had, for example, not being able to make a payment to somebody because they're in a country where there's just no ability to send to that country. That's a straightforward one, I think, that everybody can relate to. I've had a payment refused by the bank because they thought it looked fraudulent. For no great reason. It was a perfectly legitimate transaction. The work was done. As far as I'm concerned, it's legitimate. And my favorite, I think I gave it to you as an example the other day. I was paying somebody through Western Union. So a Western Union account I specifically opened for them. I pay them once, the princely sum, I think, of $20 or $22. And then the following month, I pay them again, $25, quite possibly. And then the third month, I pay them $20, and it doesn't go through. And there's a to and fro that involves, I think, 3 or 4 people in it. And in the end, it turns out that he's been flagged as by Western Union as somehow possibly not legit anymore, or receiving too much money. I don't really understand the nature of the problem. But we solved that, perhaps not in the most compliant way ever. He gave me one of his friends' Western Union accounts, and off the money went to them. So God knows what we're going to do the next time we have to pay this person. Hopefully it gets sorted out. But these are the sort of things you just have to be a little creative. And this guy was based in a country where there really wasn't much else available to pay him anyway.
Yeah, that can be tricky. So I guess Payoneer and Wise can be that intermediary where they can actually make sure those funds are transferred to the right person. How easy is it to set up an account with Payoneer or Wise? Nathan?
Yeah, look, it's quite simple. It does depend on what service you're looking at. So if it's just setting up an account to do, a few transactions a month, it's a case of, going to the website, clicking on the link, setting up an account. It's usually live in most countries in a couple of hours. There will be some KYC that needs to be done, and that's pretty much it. If it's Something a little bit more complicated, so you're looking for an integrated solution to enable payouts at scale, i.e., if you can imagine Airbnb uses us, they don't have people sitting there doing each individual payment for every single person who's staying at any Airbnb all around the world. That's just not feasible. So as a result, we've got API capabilities that enable those payouts at scale. So that is something that takes a little bit longer, and it's a little bit of a more thorough process, but it can be set up in a matter of a week, really, if someone wanted to do it, depending on their infrastructure and their development capabilities. But that's definitely something that through all of our processes, generally, depending on especially that enterprise payout side, that integrated side, we have teams that are able to help and discuss it with people and help on board. So we do have that support globally. We've got offices in 26 cities around the world. So there's always someone to talk to that can help as well.
Yeah, great. And Dan?
Yeah, so setting up, or at least our self-service products at Wise are very, very quick and easy to access. So we have 4 core products at Wise. 3 of them, any typical consumer can access through our app. So those are quite simply our send product, our receive product, and our multi-currency account with a linked debit card in some countries. The 4th product is really one that's come about through our recent process of becoming a public company, changing our name, etc. And that's what we actually call Wise Platform. So that is the platform that those 3 direct-to-consumer products are actually built on. And what we're doing with Wise Platform is now taking it to other cross-border payment channels, such as traditional banks, and partnering with them to actually deliver that service to anyone who's currently using their native bank app, for example, on their phone. So that FX as a service would then live within, for example, your own bank's app experience, but it would be completely powered by Wise and all the smarts that happen in the background. And so that's really the easiest way that somebody can get started with Wise, and we're rapidly launching it through countries in Asia Pacific and Europe, hoping to push it a little bit more global over the next 6 to 12 months. But we're hoping that will reduce some of the barriers to entry for people who may not have actually used a non-bank or a fintech outside of their typical channels before.
Yeah, even the word fintech can be quite new for a lot of people. And just going by the polls here, 50% of users using bank transfers, but also the second poll question was about why are you using your current method? And it's because contractors or vendors are requesting that method. 25% there said they're familiar with it, so they go with what they're familiar with. And I guess one of the things that we want to talk about is the fees associated with making cross-border payments. Who absorbs those fees? And I guess we have to have that discussion first up when we initiate a discussion about a job and how it's going to be paid and that kind of thing. Mike, maybe you could talk to this question about what's the status quo about who absorbs fees, regardless of whichever payment method you choose. Is it the LSC or is it the freelancer? What's the status quo, or is there a status quo?
I think from our experience, the status quo is that the LSC, so the company, absorbs the fees, but that's typically when they are pushing the way that they're going to send the money. So I think in a case where Dominic brought up that if it's something that's unusual and perhaps you're sending, like I said before, USD to Ukraine, and it's going to cost you more than you might have expected previously, I think then there's a conversation between the company and the final payee. That's what we find. Certainly, different people handle it different ways, depending on how they want to send the money. But it's always important to have the conversation first. Dominic said that right away in this panel. And if a company is not outlining its payment terms ahead of time, you're going to run into issues, emotional issues, and then a million questions about what does Payoneer charge me to get the money? Why is there a currency exchange? Does I have a Wise account, but you didn't find it initially. You sent it to my bank. Those kind of things will happen if you don't work ahead and have the conversation, or at least outline it. I don't think an actual conversation needs to happen, but you may need to have something that you send all your new vendors that allows them to onboard this way.
Yeah, so perhaps someone in the finance department needs to do a bit of research and have several different methods of payment researched, the fees associated, because even paying and then the person receiving, there may be fees associated with withdrawing that money and cross currencies and so on and so forth. So it's important to do that up front and research, and then you don't want to be backpedaling after you find this method of payment and then you realize, oh, there's fees associated then. I guess Payoneer and Wise take all of that out of the equation. Would that be correct, Nathan?
Yeah, so we work typically with our clients, our vendors, who then decide how it is that they want to structure that. So do you want the payee to pay for the fees, or do you want to pay for the fees yourself? So we can select either way, especially via our integrated solution. And that integrated solution is offered bank transfer or Payoneer account as methods of payment, or even card payments. So there's a couple of options in terms of that. And again, the fees can be absorbed whichever. And again, as Mike alluded to, I think it's really important to have the clarity up front as to how those fees are going to be applied, so that the payees are aware when they're signing up that's how it's going to be. It's information that's really critical, that they're aware of it when they're signing up. And if you do decide to make a change down the track, that's okay again, as long as it's communicated clearly to the payee that this is the change moving forward. And these are the rationale for the change. So, for example, if you were using wire transfers in the past, there were intermediary bank charges that were being made. So therefore, now we're using a fintech that's going to be providing our payments to hopefully make it cheaper and faster. And that's the reason why, those costs associated are now what they are.
Yeah, yeah. And Dan, I can see you nodding your head. You're probably along the same lines here.
Absolutely. I think it's a really interesting point that, firstly, cross-border payments have remained largely unchanged for the better part of 20 or 30 years. And I think a big element of that may be to do with people's stickiness to traditional payment methods. People will stick with the methods that they know, but unfortunately what this creates is a monopoly. So systems like SWIFT or traditional cross-border payments can start charging exponential fees and add-ons, and customers won't actually go and look for better options. So on the other hand, Wise is a consumer-first business. We see any sort of attrition away from traditional cross-border payment methods as good for cross-border payments in general. The consumer should always be looking for what's the best way to effect this payment, what's the cheapest way or the fastest way to effect this payment, rather than just sticking with traditional methods. Because not only does that allow a great marketplace for innovation and companies like a lot of whom are well represented in this forum here today, but it also means that the solutions are going to improve out of sight.
Yeah, yeah. I guess maybe a question for you, Dominic. What would you like to see improved or offered in the finance space? What would be the best case scenario? Talk to Payoneer and Wise and let them know now.
Look, it's music to my ears. I think the low barrier to entry is the biggest thing for me, because it's a very pay-centric system. It's basically the pay that kind of dictates the terms of how you're going to pay. So I generally, by the way, I tend to absorb fees because I agree on a fee for a job, and I think the person should receive what we've agreed. And I also have a little saying for America, which is whether I'm the payer or the payee, I always pay the receiving fee. That seems to be the way. But what I'm looking for is something that's easy to access, easy to get into to start with, and ideally that diminishes the fees and diminishes the admin and the waiting time to get all of it done. So it's music to my ears when I hear that the compliance is done. When you're going to pay somebody through Payoneer or through Wise, that they know that person is legit. That's a fantastic thing to hear. It's also fantastic to hear that you probably think $30 to pay $30 to wire $20 is not right, because I absorb it and I don't pass that cost on. I just make a loss on a number of transfers a lot of the time. So anything that can decrease that, diminish that, is a fantastic thing to have.
Yeah, that's right. And Mike, what would you like to see improved in the finance space, in fintech for payments?
I would like to see everything get faster. I think people want to get paid quickly. I think we're delivering goods and services quickly around the world, and people want to receive their money as quickly as possible, or at least have the idea that it's going to become available quickly to them, and really everywhere. So that's been our goal to begin with, and I think we're using services like those on this this panel to try and achieve that. And back to the initial point, I think that's why people like PayPal. I think Dominic brought that up. You know, why would anyone use PayPal? Well, it's fast, and I can get it anywhere. And in theory, you have that money in minutes. It doesn't mean you're able to access it. That's not always the case. But you do have the money. So I'd like to see also people know that these things are out there. So the more education possible to freelancers and to companies that can understand that this shouldn't be so scary, that there's really good technology and really good people in this side of the industry.
Yeah. Yep. And just for those receivers, they see that payment, it's visible there, so that gives them peace of mind and faster payments, of course. Dan, what will we see next in fintech, and what's up and coming, and what will be improved in fintech from your perspective? And this is probably something we haven't thought about on the panel yet.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's almost blink and you miss it in this day and age, isn't it? Everything's just accelerating so quickly. I think, to my mind, the thing that fintech can't go without is regtech, right? As the solutions in the market continue to evolve and enhance and become faster and quicker, and in some cases brand new, like all the buy now, pay later products and companies that we've seen over the last few years, the regulation and the legislation has to rapidly evolve to keep up. And so we're seeing a number of these companies in the complementary regtech space actually now come out into the market. I think that is quite an exciting space because it levels the playing field for a lot of fintech solutions, and ultimately it's there to protect the end consumer as well. So keep an eye on regtech.
RegTech, okay. We might put in the last poll question, but also, Nathan, I want to ask you, for Payoneer, what will we see next in fintech?
Look, we really see the global economy and the digitization of the global economy taking off even more so than it has to date. And that's kind of a scary thing, that the amount of change that's occurred in the last 24 months that everyone's seen, just the extent of borders shrinking and people doing business more globally is significantly apparent. I think then it goes back to Dominic's point around how do you make payments cheaper. I think Dominic said it, or maybe Mike said, they both indicated it. And, how do you make it cheaper and faster? And that's really what it's getting down to. And, we're very good at USD to Euro payments and USD to Euro payments very fast, very cheap. But how do you do that and democratize it across the globe to emerging markets and to currencies that are a lot harder to get to? So that is where I kind of see opportunity and businesses taking advantage of that those cross-border capabilities to really, expand their businesses and grow globally.
Yeah, and you mentioned emerging markets. I guess this is where the stickler is. Yep. We might have worked it out for Europe, Euro to USD, but what about those other minority countries where those languages are in demand, and we need to use freelancers from those countries to complete, translation requests or interpreting requests. We have a few questions come in within the Q&A, and
yeah, we're at that moment, actually. Believe it or not, we're 45 minutes in, and we should probably reach out for questions from the audience. I had a few come in. Let me just go through the list here.
And if I could just jump in, with the last poll question. The last poll question was, would you consider other methods of international payments after listening to this panel? And 75% of you said yes. So I'm glad we were of service to the listeners here. But yeah, please type in your questions, and here's your opportunity to ask Payoneer, Wise, pros.com, and even Dominic, if you choose to, about payments across borders.
Yeah, so let me get to the first question here. It says, I would request each panelist to let us know which payment option each of them would recommend to us.
Dominic.
Okay, I've been volunteered to answer that one. That's an even Dominic question.
We know that Payoneer might be a bit biased and Wise, but you know.
Look, I can't tell you right now between Payoneer and Wise, for example, but I'm very excited to look into both, and I would suggest you do both. I don't see that one is mutually exclusive from the other. I'm not sure if the coverage of countries and currencies is the same. That's not something we've looked at, in detail with the offering. But it does seem that they'll beat PayPal and my local bank by quite a margin. So I'm definitely sold on investigating this further, and I would most likely encourage others to do the same.
We had a question around what are the top 5 things to consider when choosing a payment method? And open that up to whoever.
I can
to start.
I can start. I think I can try and come up with 5 anyway. Is that number 1 is going to be? I think it was asked, but what does it take for you to set it up? Is it going to fit into your workflow? So if you're a small office and you're typically only sending out local payments to your country, how do you bring it in, and can it encapsulate more of what you're trying to do? What are the fees? That's going to be very important. What's it going to cost you? Does it get to all of the countries that you want to get to? So if you're adding a lot of work in a certain region that you've never paid before, does this company specialize there? And does it reach the audience that you're trying to get to? I don't know if that's 5, but and then how fast does it work for you? Some payment will require you to bank a bunch of money with them. I don't remember how we work with. I think these work directly within your bank and can take money from your bank. So you're going to want to figure those things out too. Do I have to be liquid and have cash places? Again, I don't think Payoneer and Wise require that. They can just go into your bank and grab the money.
Yeah, do you want to add any flavor to that, Nathan or Daniel?
You can go, Dan, if you want first.
Sure. Yeah, I think, look, as a principle, it's very important to try out as many different options as you can. Otherwise, you won't really know what is going to be important to you in actually making that transaction. So maybe it's timely, now that we're coming to hopefully the close of COVID, to rekindle a few international friendships and send a few small amounts just to try them out. Look, with respect to coverage and being able to hold sort of multiple currencies, that's certainly something that Wise has solved for by way of our multi-currency account. So yes, we can actually go and receive a payment either directly from someone's bank or from their card or even a PayPal pay-in. But a lot of our customers do actually hold a balance with us in different currencies as well, and they'll either swap or hold in those as is convenient or as they see fit. So for a language service company that might be typically transacting across 3 or 4 countries, it's often not a bad thing to hold a few balances in those countries or currencies where they commonly transact.
And I would just add, the only other thing is really that compliance piece is really important. We touched on it earlier. How are you making sure that your payment method is actually helping you reduce fraudulent actors and your interaction with those. So especially if you've got some sort of an automated onboarding flow. So it depends on the scale of your business. So if the nature of your business is you're reaching out and translators can just come to your website, you're not necessarily speaking to them, but they're able to interact with your, and sign up and start translating for you, and then you have to pay them and you don't know who they are. That's where those compliance and risk tools start to become really, really important. So that's probably something else to add on top of what everyone else has said.
I would also add, if I may, reporting, the reporting that's available within the platform. This is a very boring bookkeeping sort of thing. But if you're holding several currencies, you're making loads of payments, you need to be able to account for it at the end of every period of sorts.
Yeah, that leads into actually probably the last question that we can have for this session today, but I think a very important one and something I'd like to hear back from everyone around integration with accounting software. We have a question around, does Payoneer Wise allow for bank reconciliation, payments integration with accounting software? I'd like to extend that a little further, even to API integration with other products out there. What's on deck with your products? And I'll go start with Dan first.
Sure. So Wise is traditionally an API-first company. So as I mentioned before, our 3 major consumer products in the market are all built on the one single API. And the real focus for Wise at the moment is about partnerships. And that's not just with banks or financial institutions. That also does include sort of non-bank partners as well, the likes of Xero, MyOb, etc. And so by providing this API to these sorts of partners, they get access to the full suite of Wise products, capabilities, coverage, currency routes, etc. That's really the goal for us over the next few years, is how can we provide these services through synergistic programs or platforms that our end users, such as language service companies, are actually using day to day. So that is something that we're very active in the market, making a lot of noise about at the moment.
Fantastic.
And from a Payoneer perspective, probably similar. I mean, we're fortunate we've been in the partnerships game for quite a number of years. So we're already integrated, for example, with tax solutions worldwide, whether it be VAT, which HMRC in the UK, we've got US integrations as well. So it makes the paying of tax very easy as well and free for a lot of our clients. And then we also have, outside of ERP integrations, there's a number of other integrations that we've got as well that enable people to be able to sort of manage their finances, but do other things. In e-commerce, for example, it would be with logistics companies. I mean, it's not relevant to translation services, but that's just an example of the types of infrastructure we've got and that we offer. But
Sure.
Specifically, one of the key ones is that banking, the ERP, the accounting software integrations. That is really critical to help businesses manage their finances on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, it can get away from you very, very quickly.
Correct.
when you scale, and especially when you have hundreds and then thousands of micropayments to track. Just mind-numbing. I think we're pretty much run down the clock here, and so what I'd like to do is close out the session. Thank all of our panelists and our host, Patricia. I want to just go around the horn and say thank you to all of you for joining us here at GALAConnected. And again, we could probably talk another full hour on this because I think it's something that all language service agencies and language industry organizations have to deal with and do deal with, and learning about other options, I think that exists is very important. We hope to see everyone continue to join us in the other sessions here at GALAConnected. I think there's a product demo coming up shortly. Again, I would encourage everyone at Gala to reach out if you have additional questions. We can follow up with that and connect up in the networking rooms or the lounge. And we look forward to seeing you at future sessions for the rest of the day. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.